Hello everyone, I greet all lovers of science and reading in advance. How are everything going? I sincerely hope that everything goes well for you, that every day things go better for you from victory to victory in your close lives. Otherwise, I hope that this type of content serves as a means to bring peace, tranquility, desire to live and understand more and more about the true nature of science. And in this video, this way understand more about life itself. This video is the first video in a series on the history of science from Thales of Miletus to the present day. My intention is not for you to stop reading books so that you can replace them with video on YouTube only, but rather that we complement the reading of book with video on YouTube. The idea is that with this type of videos, the sense of pleasure in readings is generated in each of you, which is a very sweet sense, which at first was difficult to develop, but which later becomes a huge pleasure for those who enjoy it and brings very good results for those who learn to appreciate the true meaning of reading, which in its last stage generates great satisfaction and wisdom for those who apply in their lives, especially if they are good books, especially books that deal with on scientific topics, such as the book about which we will make videos of comment readings just in this channel. Before starting, I want to thank all those people who have take their times to register in this channel and like each of the videos that have been published. It is very important for me and also for YouTube that you each like each of the videos that we publish here on this channel, because this way the platform understands that this type of content is really relevant for the entire community registered on YouTube, which it helps the YouTube algorithm distribute this type of content to more and more people. Remember that knowledge is the only wealth that when you share it, you cannot evade it but multiply it. So be generous, um, like I am by generous with you. Share this link of this video with more people close to you. Having said that, all that, let's get started. Well, first, to start this walk, we need to do a little story. Excuse the redundance, size this video is about that, about story. Outro, not just any type of story, but the story of science. Let's tell a story that really binds a long time ago, when man managed to dominate fire by the clever blow of two flint stones, and it ends. No, never ends. But it's never the story of how our species made its way strongly from the depths of the African savannas towards the rest of the planet, found cities, and populated them with the bees, studied and managed to understand some celestial and terrestrial phenomena, investigate in the depths of matter. He glimpsed the enormity of the universe and the unusual complexity of the small one. He had to admit with courage and certain disappointment that their place in the total picture is insignificant. And even so, he was not intimidated and continued explaining, and explaining. What follows is not a story of great heroes and great discoveries, or at least that's not all. It is rather that of the multiple attempts and lines of truth that should come up with a very satisfactory explanation of these things, incomprehensible that, for lack of a better word, we call reality. It is narration of a huge chain of misunderstanding, of confusions, errors, and corrections, occurring that without, however, with twists and turns, this lead improbably to our current chronologies. In this story is the inevitable to perceive threats on language of thought that have dragged on over the centuries, already inclining towards a side, now to the other, after eclipsed for a time and resurfacing later. To give in just one example, the atomism that triumphed in the 19th century recognized traits that they go back to the Greeks, Democritus and Leucippus, so insulted by old Aristotle. This does not mean that in the 60th century before Christ, Jesus Christ, the natural philosophers as scientists were called by them. They would have been able to explain the structure of matter just as the Dalton, Thomson, Rutherford, Bohr quarter ladder did. But along its journey, the human intellect, sometimes for empirical reasons, sometimes for theoretical reasons, sometimes for same ideas. What happened uh, by a need complete a system, go back and for in same ideas. What happened in the 17th century could be thought of with clarity in the um, a very age ago. A lot institution of medieval solves the problems which some moderns cannot explain it. An astronomical system of classical antiquity survives and touch for 30 centuries and is collapsed with a brilliant stroke of institutions. Adroit, the view we have of science today date back to the one of the ignorance from the 60th and 70th centuries, from that giant intellectual epic that stretched roughly between Copernicus and Newton. Our story, our history, being earlier, much earlier. This is because although the idea of scientific progress is relatively new in the history of humanity, science is not. Um, it all started there. The Greeks, more than 205 2,500 years ago managed science, and they were very clear about that the conjunction of the observation and theory and arrive at surprising results which motivate the emergence in Alexandria of the science individuals. Furthermore, contrary to what is common thought, there was a rich science medieval in the second part of the Middle Age after um, the century 11, we think a lot about the structure of the world and above all about the nature of the movement which would be the problem on which the scientific revolutions would be sustained. He argued there were different schools and there was above all a great impressive intellectual Roger Bacon in managing machines, flying boats and submarines before Leonardo Williams of Ockham cut a thread between reason and faith and Bernard of Chartres with an advanced idea of the dialogic character of the intellectual progress, he said, if we further is it's because we are supported on the shoulders of giants, a phrase that is fact Newton popularized later in a scandalous controversy he had with Robert Hooke, and which defines very well the way in which scientific struggle advance and way it developed from primitive turtles who swam in the water that keep the world up to par particle pattern. You want to check it? Hadron Super Accelerator, also called for obvious purposes adversity God's machine, although it has nothing to do with not God. And today we know more, much more about astronomy that Ptolemy and Kepler of physics, that Newton and ever Einstein of medicine that Hippocrates and chemistry that Lavoisier we have in our moon's hands so, there are the V's exploring Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, or measurement of the universe is more accurate than that. Copernicus despises what we don't know, and what we don't know we imagine that we don't know, we can say that the heritage of knowledge we have is greater, objectively greater, than the one of the Greeks had, or the one they had 2 centuries ago. If we think about it this way, we can't help but wonder how we go from the luminous intuition of Thales of Miletus to our multiform contemporary reality. All this has evidently the limits of an unparalleled adventures. It is the story of man's intellectual effort to understand the world in which he had to live. Let's go. Science before science. Well, science before science. Let's go on a long journey. In it, we will explore the path in which primitive views of the world could come to the surface become the highly complex and mathematical world will what we have today about the functioning of the universe and things what in it and a long journey, yes, that extends from the most primitive scientific theories up to relativity, the Big Bang, and this um, world of engines, computers, and devices in which some that the falls we get used to living. On that journey, we will begin chronologically with science in antiquity, and our first station will be, as is traditional, Greece. But before Greece entered the sense and made it shine, there were great empires and cities. There were pyramids and ziggurats, and even before the fertile, bright, and long prehistoric night, during that we humans go through a tango of evolution strongly, laboriously against a world unfavorable. We can't forget all this, so we have to make a few stops before meeting the man who invented the science. So let's go. We must go forget we must not go forget that human history, what we consider human history, is just a small and almost miserable fraction of our history and a special, and even our history as technological special. In other words, there is no need to lose think of the fact that, in general, when we think about this history of dude, we only convert the last 10 or 12,000 years when the true story, the one that goes back to the origin of Homo sapiens or Homo sapiens sapiens has about 100,000 years ago, and much more if we go back to our ancestors, the hominids who had certainly its own technologies, sometimes quite sophisticated, which is no small thing to say. It means that there was certainly some that we can call without remorse of conscious technology prehistoric. And so, if skeletons operate 100,000 years ago, anatomically modern, they already existing 400,000 ago. They lead the Pekin's man's fire. The control of fire was one of the most important technology revolution in the world, human's history. In the last of the fire, which provides shelter and defense in addition to light, ceramics, and stone instruments, the manufacture of wooden darts, making 400,000 years, the bow and arrow, the logs and traps, and the networks. There are 23,000, and they are ocean of time, of which the world gives us more and more details. Work of archaeologists prehistoric constitute 99% of human history, especially as we said before, if we take into account our ancestors, the hominids, who they left the Earth's matters or footprints in Laetoli, Tanzania, Africa, preserved due to the eruptions of volcanoes that covered them with ashes and which, according to dating, date back to 3 million years ago. 3 million years ago, it's hard to imagine, but is the long of down of the human species regarding technology. It is possible that all advances have came about accidentally or through the testing system and error, or simply by the imaginative impulse to see the behavior of a given substance. Of course, they are nothing more than conjectures, but can refer to all these as science? I don't believe per one, but on the one hand, it cannot be denied that all these people, to achieve their techniques, they experiment in the general sense of the word. In the other words, the experiments, or rather the tests, were not idealized to test theories, but for a pragmatic improvement of the final product, testing casting techniques to obtain better alloys as any artisan does modern today. They also did no aptly conscious theorizing, but they did aptly in experience. This is evident in the complexity and detail many classification systems discovered in societies, primitive, such as, for example, that in the Philippines, which listed um, 461 zoological types. Okay, so later, revolution. Yes, revolution. About 10,000 years ago, more or less, a revolution occurred in technology, perhaps the most important in humanity history, or second, if we consider the domestication of fire, the discovery of agriculture. Of course, agriculture. The process extended throughout of a few thousand years and somehow defined the lines generalized of globalized culture. The passage of hunting and harvesting for agriculture involved new technologies, such as irrigation or the domestication of sims and animals, and above all, the emergence um, of the concept of properties. For nomad property, especially if it heavy, represent a nuance in or permanent transport. For a sedentary person, no, and it can be source of greed, rivalry, and power. Accustomed to the apparent speed with which today technology, it is difficult to imagine that an innovation such of such weight as agriculture spread at a snail's pace, although it seems firm and constant. But Pins think that um, this revolution hasn't yet been completed of all. 3,000 years later, villages continue to exist. Nomads, semi-nomadic villages today, hunter-gatherers villages, and there are even peoples that never existed and never existed. Contact with Western culture, and in many cases, it is not possible. Be Bell there's the reason and give the reason. Um, so as it was in a short period of 3 or 4 thousand years, their agriculture extended to all the places where it later became established great civilization like China, the Indus Valley, Mexico and Peru, Mesopotamia, Egypt. In this regard, say a short period of 3 or 4 thousand years to give an idea of what is so long duration, where thousand years means nothing. It's a perspective that we should to result very complicated, precisely because our perspective, on the contrary, is of very short duration. In it, however, a human life lasts on average 80 years, which is only 3,000 days. Saying in days seems very little, right? And for this reason, things about the long discovery disconcerting duration Greeks of and the 5th century, the pyramid seems ancient, like testimony of Herodotus, historians and traveler of the 50th century before Christ. It's not rare. It's the temporal distance between Herodotus to the pyramids three, is more than same that we exist between Herodotus and we together today. But let's go back. Agriculture generates a radical transformation of society because it implies um, the transition from nomadic society to otherwise sedentary. There is a lack of permanent settlement for, but these think that this revolution hasn't yet been completed today at all. 12,000 years later, there are still people nomads, semi-nomads, people gardener, people are there, even people have never had nor want to have contacts with Western culture, and in many cases isn't possible to be agree with them. Of course, for the worse, of course. Be that as it may, in a short period of 3 or 4 thousand years, the agriculture spread to all these places where it was later, like I say you before, after, before. But let's go back and in our story, Mesopotamia, located in Mesopotamia located between the Euphrates and the Tigris, where writing emerged. It was a meeting of people who adopted a multiply of organizational form, ranging from cities, rules, and petty kings to empires like the fearsome Assyrian Empire, which lasted with shocks from to another empires and which at some point extended to the border with Egypt. All of these, as you can imagine, generate a state of permanent war and constant uncertainty. What will be the next invader? Yes, which encouraged the development of the arts of adivinations inherent from the ancient Neolithic traditions from the Middle Ages, um, or transported and throughout the cities that from time to time they were looking to the make a place from themselves, to say the least. With there after of massacres, wars and calamities in that region, there are another fertile such divinatory arts to call them in some way, and they were fundamental based on scrutiny of the heaven, in which the stars were assimilated to gods, and also in the examination of the entrails of sacrificial victims, including, along with a whole parallel of amulets and question about whether the birds were flying left or right and things like that. Largely for this reason, sky watching is in particular has been meticulous and led to the accumulation of very long and data tables that allow use to predict eclipses and the sun on the moon and other celestial phenomena. The Mesopotamians recognized the planets visible to the naked eye as distinct from the stars. It's very impressive for me. This called constellations, many of which took slightly modified the Greeks and introduced the zodiac, which marks the annual path of the sun, moon, and planets throughout the years. The apparent path or movement, as it is still obviously, it was not throughout that it is the earth that moves. Contrary to mythological cosmogonies, all these data, as well as such as arithmetical table of addition, multiplication, and division that developed the extreme, including the use of fractions, had an earthly character, which was not linked to God's no type. By the way, while we're at it, it should be said that civilizations, Babylonian, those who occupied lower and lower Mesopotamia, had a crucial tool in managing the numbers because they developed a numeric system with two original features compared to all old systems. It's about of positional number system based on sexagesimal. It is based 50 instead of 10. But innovation, the positional and the sexagesimality would have a long life. From the sexagesimal question, there are still traces in our division of our hours in 60 minutes and minutes in 60 seconds. The positional system, which opposes to the principle of juxtaposition, and that was the basis practically of the entire ancient system and which is preserved in the notation with figures Romans, is what we use today. The value of a thing numeric depends on its relative position in the right number. For example, 50, 500, 505, 555, for example, each of the five has a different value, although the character used is identical. On the other hand, the Babylonians managed to inventory of tables some of the most frequent mathematical operations, including tables of a square roots, cubes, and cube roots that solve simple equations. They had excellent approximation of the p number, which, as you know, is the relationship between the diameter and the length of the circumference and is related to all calculations and observations that are made over the sky and also on Earth. P is fundamental in architecture, in measuring distance, in engineering, as it affects everything that is circular. Sometimes I think that developing mathematics of culture can be measured by approximating. I have to be auto auto this idea of mine is possible nothing more than an exaggeration. Do you know how many decimal places we know today? More than 2 billions. Although only 6 are enough to send a rocket to Saturn. In short, Babylon's astronomy and mathematics were of great importance for the speculative, philosophical, scientific movement which begins in Greece in the 5th century before Christ, to which we go dedicate a good part of the book because that's where our start to systematically construct scientific thinking as we conceive this today. And it is no coincidence that Babylon was essential for the Greeks, given that it had been the largest, richest, and most cultural city in the world. Still in the 2nd century, after Christ, Claudius himself, Ptolemy's assessed very complete records of eclipses from reign of Nabonazar, 8th century before of Christ onward, um, uses the first regnal year as a starting point for all our calculation astronomical. These Babylon's records were made original for astronomical purpose or the check the calendar which applies that they carry out numerous observations of a variety of celestial phenomena. However, despite the soulless tables and calculations, cosmology, Babylonian culture remaining interweaved with mythology and those not appear to have there was, it did not reach us. Let's talk about this cosmology immediately when we see how the universe was conceived by the first great civilizations. Well, now we are with Egypt. Egypt is a gift from a Nile. Egypt around 3000 before Christ was established as a state, territorial and centralized. What does territorial means? To mean which is a state ruled by certain pharaoh with bureaucracy, imperial, which has precise limits and borders, which within which and only within the do Egyptian laws apply. It is an important political experiment that will last 3,000 years. Not all, by the way, calm down. Processor of writing size 3000 before Christ and writing techniques extraordinary construction with unlimited and free labor. It is worth remembering the Egyptian priests also they observed the sky and the stars, as in the case of Mesopotamia, identified with gods, among other things, to predict the flood of the Nile, which owns a year flood that strip in its side and deposited the fertile silt that will guarantee crops and on which the country's prosperity depend. Like today in many countries, thus they determined that the appearance of the star Sirius separated to do more fair to the Egyptians early in morning after several months of absence and marked the beginning of the flood of the Nile, axis of the lives of nations. Herodotus himself said that Egypt is a gift from the Nile, and we will say that the Egyptians were born ex Nile, like someone owns taught me whose name I want to remember. Being politically more stable than Mesopotamia, observation of the sky was less urgent for the art of divination. The Egyptians did not have tables of the magnitude of the Mesopotamian, but arithmetic tables and solving algebraic and geometric problems. After all, the flood of Nile erased the demarcation of limits between the plots, which was necessary to rebuilding each time um, taught operations geometric. According to Herodotus, this is where geometric comes from, that the Greeks adopted, and in fact, geometry doesn't mean another thing that the measure of the land, but like Ukrainians, Mesopotamians, the Egyptians did not try to increase knowledge geometric and arithmetic at the level of generalizations, nor did they attempt demonstrate general propositions. Furthermore, in the same way, astronomical knowledge and general cosmogony were completely mixed with the religion. Now we can give ourselves the pleasure of remembering the cosmology Egyptians, Mesopotamian, and including Greeks, which have the charm and noise of mythologies. So, pre-scientific and mythologic um, cosmology, the charm and noise, yes, but also the complexity and difficulty which brings with it the multiply of gods who will serve use to establish a contrast with the first formulation, Mesopotamian cosmology. Let's start by exploring the mythological cosmology in Mesopotamia. The universe was ruled by three gods, each with different domains. The skies belong to Anu, the earth and the water around below him was the domain of Ea, and Enlil ruled the air that separated the previous two. I am putting the Babylon's names as the ancient Sumerians called them different way. Anu was a kind of father god, and it consequently he had a slightly higher status. The universe it was then governed by the Anu Ea Enlil triumvirate. The gods were descendants of the primordial chaos of water, in this case a mixture of salt water and fresh water. Originally, the domain of Anu and Ea were united and separated when Enlil separated heaven from earth. The universe Mesopotamia also included an underground ruled by a god or goddess. We don't have enough data to determine the shape they attribute to the earth, but with the partial testimony we can guess that they saw it as disk flat. On the other hand, the god Marduk, a particular deity of Babylon, he commanded the moon on which the calendar was based all the years. The celebration of Akitu New Year represents the victory of Marduk over Tiamat, the serpent, and maintained the foundation of the world. Not that the serpent Tiamat, goddess of treachery, is who will appear transfigured in the Yiddish myth or in Genesis. In Egypt, things were literally different, and I don't highly the a little of hymns. It's very curious to see everything that share pre-scientific cosmology, starting with the division tripartite world, heaven, earth, lower world. The Egyptians, in fact, they believed that the world considered of the three parts. The earth flat format, it was located in the middle, divided by the Nile and surrounded by the large ocean. Also, a cliche that is separate on Earth where the atmosphere ends, the sky was kept in its place by four supports, something represented by poles or mountains. Under the earth was hell, called Duato. This dark region contained all of the things that were absent from the visible world, but dead people and stars that disappear at dusk or in the sun after having sunk below the horizon. It was assumed that during the night it traveled to toward the region of the underworld to reappear in the east in next morning. In other words, he has a true saquism of stars and souls. Okay, Egyptian cosmology. There are at least three different versions of creation of the world in Egyptian cosmogony, and they all um, have in common that they begin with a state of primaveral waters, a limitless state arc, infinite mass of water that existing from the beginning of time and which will continue to exist in the future, and which, for any fan of precursors with excess imagination, might make you think of the particle soap after the Big Bang. Adrog, the gods, um, the earth and its thousands of inhabitants were all products of primavera waters, and these waters were still present, enveloping the world and outside, above the sky, and under hell. The original liquid state of chaos was personified by the god Nun, who have appeared to Atum, the true creator god that created from himself two new gods, one personified by Shu, god of air, and another by Tefenut, goddess of rain and humidity. The came earth and heaven, represented by the deities Geb and Nut respectively. However, the earth and the sky do not were created and separated by parts, but originally they were together and united. It was Shu who lifted Nut's body high so that the heavens could exist, and at the same time Geb, free from their bond, he formed the earth, and the story of creation continues with the appearance of a variety of new gods. The Greeks also had their creation's mythology, which appears in Hesiod's um, Theogony, written in 70th or 80th century before Christ, and which, as you might suspect, has some similarity to the cosmogonies from Mesopotamia and Egypt, despite theogonomy. Uh, Theogony is first of all a cosmogony. It also accounts for the structure of the universe. For Hesiod, the Earth was obviously flat and surrounded by a river or ocean. Again, above the Earth, there was a hemispherical sky separated from it by a bright gap during the day and dark at night. Underneath Earth was Tartarus, and underworld symmetrical with the there. Great scientific cosmology. Now, in the last part, we go to the Greek scientific cosmology. Hesiod's account of the first god is at the same time a story about how the main elements of physical world they were created. There is no creator, but there is an initial state of chaos from where, without any cause or explanation, the sky emerged, or night, nix in Greek, and darkness, erebus in Greek, are produced, and then they herema in Greek and air, ether in Greek. The original cause, in turn, wasn't always there, but it began to exist at some point. Without, however, Hesiod's text does not give any answer to the question about what is the origin of the cause or what happened in the beginning. Well, after this cosmology and mythological walk, we will now travel to shore of the Aegean Sea, where uh, we will witness the birth of science as we understand it today, because obviously all of this what I have been telling you was not enough for there to be science appropriate. Only around the 15th century did this occur in Greece, the fundamental change that would lead to the construction of the current scientific thinking. Although, to be fair, we must that is, after all, the Greeks didn't appear out of nowhere or they create science taught as stroke of magic. Like everything in story, in history of thought, stood on the shoulders of giants whose name we do not know, but whose investigations, nothing poor conditions, were important enough to a Greek could predict an eclipse and initiate it truly. The story we intend to tell in this explanation, this history of the ideas that shaped Western science. Okay, in this way, we finish this video today so that it is not too long, but, but rather that learning is pleasant. I want to thank everyone who has subscribed in the last few days and liked each of my videos. Personally, for me, it is very gratifying for me to see how my work was served them. And so if you like this video, do not hesitate to subscribe to this channel to have access to more interesting content like this, and share the link of this video with more people, your friends, family, and loved ones, so that more people like you have access to this type of contents, which we are sure will serve to enrich more and more people creating a scientific culture in all strata of our society, the great global village that the internet represents. Like this video and click the bell receive notification of videos published by this channel. See you soon in the next video and the continuation where we will continue telling more about the history of science, continue the part 2 about science in ancient times, starting with eclipses in the ancient world. Do not miss it. Sing up now and like it so that both and YouTube understand that this video is relevant to all members of the platform and to the world. Many thanks to everything. See you soon and bye bye.